Colleagues, please be seated. Dear colleagues and conference participants, I'd like to welcome you in the 24th Traditional International Conference of Rospatent. This conference is a professional one. The composition of the conference is purely professional. So I'd like to welcome you here in this hall. I welcome all the colleagues who are with us online. And I would like to wish all of you a successful conference. I wish all of you to feel well during the conference and after the conference. So let us discuss our issues, our topics that are most relevant for innovators, for scientists, and for all our countries. We have, at the moment, 605 people who have registered from 59 regions of Russia. We have 81 representatives of government authorities. We have 117 people from 26 foreign countries and organizations online with us. Dear colleagues, let us begin our conference by watching a video about the event that we held in Crimea. Crimea is a region that has been developing quite dynamically, including the intellectual property area. Today we're going to discuss with you how, starting from July 27, 2020, when the law on geographical indicators came into force, what is the DNA of Crimea, how to work with Crimea, and how to work with regional brands in Crimea and throughout Russia with geographical indicators. So stay with us. Guys, should we probably focus on travel blogging, because it's quite difficult IP when you have such a location with such excellent views. So subscribe to our channel, like us, watch us on YouTube. I have never received such a great boost of energy from any work, ever. Regional brands would help Crimea to raise to the Russian level of markets and to learn more about the world. What do you know about the new type of intellectual property geographical indications? Masha, you should know everything about it. Coming soon. We should show that your reputation, the reputation of your products, is related to the geographical indication. Grigory, Ivliev, Alexander Borisov, Valeria Oleshko. Andrei Falafeev, Irina Kiviko, David Melyikan. Good wine material, bad wine material. What is wine material actually? What is a wine material? Thank you. July the 20th, the law came to force, a long-awaited law that was initiated by the Council of Federation, supported by head of the Federation Council, Valentin Matvienko. We received 29 applications, one of them came from Crimea, and we see the modernization of the civil law that is underway in Russia is being held for the regions, for people, and it is in demand throughout the country. We showed you this teaser to be able to watch in a very calm way how the law that came into force on July the 27th, 2020 is being implemented in Russia. So the question of GIs is the topic of our conference. We can see that modernization of the civil law in the area of intellectual property implies a lot of work. We have introduced this new item of GIs, but this does not mean that the work is over. No. This conference will set us a milestone because it will help us to form civil law and its implementation practice. Our topic is transformation of the business environment. We have a roadmap to implement this strategy. The Federation Council is involved. I would like to thank Lilia Gomerova for her help in this respect and for the long-term work that resulted in this project that satisfies the business environment, satisfies the expert community, and is politically very correct. We'd like to thank the Federation Council for this work. Clearly, the Ministry of Science and Education always is involved in this work. We have now entered the era of digitization of the entire patent authority. We have introduced a law on 3D technology and electronic documentation and electronic search. And this has been done on the initiative of the Ministry of Science and Education. They have done this together very successfully with the Rospatent. When I'm waiting for these laws to come into force, October 30th, the law, one of the laws will come into force partly. The law 3D technologies will come into force on January the 16th next year. August next year, we will transfer to the system of preliminary research, preliminary expert assessment that will help us to include largest Russia's research centers into this work. The scope of the sites has been expanding. As a result, we have a new format, the so-called small forum. Patent analytics go beyond this conference already. This is why we intend, after this small forum, which will be held on the sidelines of this forum, patent analytics will raise to a totally new level. Patent analytics will have their own patent analytical days in their own format. So this conference is a part of the conference which is held by the government, the conference on open innovations. This is another traditional conference that has been held for many years. Today it is held online, and in this conference we consider intellectual property, but this was done on a direct instruction from the government to raise intellectual property to the side of open innovations. IP is discussed in all largest economic international forums held in Russia. We can see that we work together with BRICS, with WIPO, with Eurasian patent organizations, and they are all participating in our forum today. We'd like to welcome representatives of the Eurasian Patent Organization from Azerbaijan, from Kyrgyzstan, from Belarus, China, Austria, that are participating in our conference. One of the key topics of our conference will be digitalization. Digitalization of the IP sphere and digitalization of Rospatent. The Federal Service for Intellectual Property is now one of the three leaders in terms of introducing legal tech in our work. But acceleration of digitalization processes is to us an independent value. And we see that the fact that the agency was ready to transfer has helped a lot to help us with to work with the applicants and with other agencies during the pandemic. We faced a challenging situation, but the readiness for remote work, for remote consideration of various disputes between disputing parties helped us to continue the work of our agency. We have practically no paperwork inside the agency. We have no papers. We have still some papers left, but this happens due to traditional understanding of our work. But transfer to paperless document turnover is a mandatory step now with all our applicants and with all the inventors. This gives us a whole new level of quality of work. I think it is high time now to announce that it is mandatory to introduce digital communication between Rospatent and the applicant, and this change should be made in the law. As regards the pandemic, clearly the government has undertaken the necessary steps to defer fee payments and other legal steps. And I can inform you that over that period we haven't had any difficult cases. We have responded to all our applicants' requests to defer the payments, and at the moment the situation is not acute at all. We can see that these applications are considered according to a special procedure. This will all discussed separately in a special session. We find it critical that the entire community understands that inventors are offering new ways to treat people, new vaccines, new tests, new protective equipment, that they would get necessary support from Rospatent. The medium first term of first step is 22 days. We take 1 month to study all additional and supplementary scientific and patent information throughout the world. We work with the largest patent agencies and we exchange information by video conference and by email. We can see that in Eurasia, integration in the IP sphere becomes a value in itself. I would like to thank our colleagues in Eurasia, in particular the president of the Eurasian agency for his work for creating a new site of Eurasian IP, Eurasian Industrial Sample. Eurasian intellectual property have the future. There will be in greater demand than now. On October the 27th, this protocol and also the protocol on creating a single trademark of the Eurasian Union in the State Duma of the Russian Federation, I hope will be ratified. This will give us a totally new impetus in our work. These 2 days will be full of fruitful work. All the events will be held online, and only the most courageous people from the military industrial complex are represented here offline. They'll be holding their events offline, but while observing all the measures of protection that are now mandatory for offline events. Now, let me please proceed to speeches by our honorable colleagues. I suggest that Lilia Gumerova, head of the Committee for Science, Culture and Education from the Council of Federation, speaks here. She has dedicated all her work in the Parliament to intellectual property. Good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning, dear conference participants. I'm very glad to welcome you on behalf of the Council of the Russian Federation. I would like to extend you warmest greetings from the Deputy Chair of the Federation Council, Head of the Council for Intellectual Property, Ayaz Omakhanov, and we wish this conference a very fruitful work. Grigory Petrovich, indeed, this conference has become a traditional one. It caused a lot of interest in the international community at a very high level of experts in this area. And most importantly, we as a regional chamber are glad that you have been involving regions more and more in this very important agenda. Dear colleagues, it is a special pleasure for me to see that this conference began with a video. This video discussed the law that came into force in July 2020 on geographical indications. We worked together with Rospatent and with experts that are represented here on this work. I see Natalia Zolotic. I remember that 3 years ago, we were thinking, how do we raise this topic in the regions? What do regions need? And this is when we had this idea. And as a result, we have an extensive list of IP items, geographical indications, and this topic is supported by WIPO a lot. Clearly, we understand that we need to do a lot of work together with the regions to create a legal culture, to understand, to make it very clear how important it is to use this to replenish the economy of the entities of the Russian Federation. Colleagues, we have heard many times in this hall that the Federation Council finds the IP topic and its development one of the key priorities. I would like to underscore that this Rospatent conference is an authoritative international site where we can discuss a widest range of questions on this topic. Today, the Federation Council supports numerous initiatives by Rospatent and the professional community on transformation of the IP sphere, on digitalization of government services, everything that supports inventions. But also, we are an active agent in this process, aimed to improve laws in this area and to develop new proposals on the development of the Institute of Intellectual Property. In pursuance of the instruction of the chair of the Federation Council, we have been able to increase the registration of appellations of origin. We have had a competition of sorts. Mr. Ivliev, we have lots of people who have done this. Previously, people wouldn't understand what to do and how to do, where to go to have this registered. So we have prepared a special guideline, a roadmap to explain what to do. Over a very short period of time, we have increased the number of appellations of origin 60%. We're now doing a lot to register geographical indications. As Mr. Ivliev has mentioned, we have received 28 applications already from the agricultural sector, from the arts and crafts sector. This is all that Russia takes pride in, that underlines Russia's specialty. We understand, and we are ready to work together for Russia to help access the Geneva Act of the Lisbon Agreement. This will help us to become a member of the international legal community and to have our products protected at the international level.
Today has already been said about that we are transforming the intellectual property transformation roadmap, and the initiatives of the senators have been included in that roadmap. There are specific items and provisions in that roadmap, and we sincerely believe that, moreover, that there is a supervisor on that very important direction, Mr. Belousov, responsible for that, and we hope that we will speed fast our initiatives. I would like to remind you that during the session of the meeting between the committee and the State Duma, all our bills and draft laws were supported, and Grigory Petrovich, thank you so much, that these items were included into the roadmap, and these our propositions would be discussed at the round table and would be highlighted in the reports and presentations of our joint work. I'm confident, dear colleagues, that the conference will be one more step forward and will consolidate our efforts and elaborate and fine-tune certain things which are still arbitrary, and will come up with some joint approaches, common approaches. I'd like to thank especially the representative of the Eurasian Patent Agency, Ms. Tlevlesova. Ms. Ivliev, we are missing you very much. We have very interesting ideas on our minds, and in the nearest future, invite you to join our joint project on drafting the third Eurasian Women's Forum. A special platform would be dedicated to female scholars. And moreover, Petrovich, Mr. Ivliev, I think that we'll discuss IP there. And I will not list the ideas and initiatives which we have already elaborated with your support. And I'm just extending my arm of assistance to you so that you could be prepared for the Eurasian Female or Women's Forum, where special attention will be dedicated to that topic. Dear colleagues, I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity to congratulate on behalf of my committee the whole team of the Intellectual Property Agency on the occasion of the 65th anniversary. I wish you to stay healthy, which is clearly very important. And Mr. Ivliev, when we met with your team, I asked how Rospatent actually is preventing COVID-19. Probably you have already come up with the ideas how to treat COVID-19 and are using state-of-the-art technologies for that. So I wish you to stay healthy. And the roadmap, which is being discussed by the government, I think that this is our roadmap, including the initiatives which have to be adopted and elaborated, including laws and bylaws adjacent to that. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm confident that our committee and the Intellectual Property Council at our chamber in the regions will continue this no-nonsense discussion with the Rospatent, which consolidates a huge pool of experts, many of whom are present here. Thank you so much. And we actually have a very good future for the work. Dear colleagues, we have published a book timed to that conference on the topic which is highlighted at this session, and we have aggregated our experience over the last 5 years, the propositions and documents which were used in our work. These are either official documents or the minutes and protocols and public speeches. If you're interested, we have hard copies with QR codes, and actually you can get familiar with the documents, and we have an e-version which is published on the website. And you're very much welcome to visit the website, use the hyperlink in order to see all the documents dedicated to the topics which are of interest to you. Most acute and relevant scientific problems are reflected in another book which has the same title, but this is a collection of abstracts of our leading experts and scholars who participated in the work of our sections. Not everyone actually can join the work of the sections, but when you read this book, you will get a glimpse of what will be discussed at the round tables discussions. Can you please show the hyperlink to the website so that everyone could see that and probably take a picture of that and work with these materials? Besides, I would like to thank Intellectual Property Journal, which made a special issue timed to the conference. This is the work which allows us not only to just get some ideas, but to help the whole country get familiar with our work and join our work. It is for several times that we named an active participant in our joint work. Mrs. Souley Verbembekovna, over to you. Ms. Ivliev, please tell us about the activity of your agency in the area of intellectual property.
Разрешите мне поприветствовать вас от имени Российской патентной организации. Я очень рада всех видеть, всех приветствовать. И вы знаете, мы еще так будем встречаться в окошечках,
I think that we will see more than once, and each of us is an expert. Inaudible.
Григорий Петрович, слышно?
Mr. Ivliev, can you hear me now?
Что-то прерывается. Пожалуйста, проверьте.
No.
Не слышно?
Подвиньте,
Can you hear me?
подвиньте микрофон поближе, будет лучше.
Can you move the mic closer to your mouth?
Слышно теперь?
Да,
Лучше?
лучше.
Can you hear me now? We do.
Ну, я хотел бы вернуться к теме,
I'd like to
которая
get
действительно
back
была
to the
задана.
topic which really was
Я очень рада,
stated,
еще раз
and I'm
повторяю,
very
видеть
glad,
своих
let me
коллег
repeat
немножко
that,
в
I'm
другом
glad to see
формате,
my
в таких
colleagues in a
окошечках.
different
И
format
Кирилл Султановича
on the
и
screen of
Ильи
my
Салаватова
Zoom
я не вижу,
application.
я
And
слышала
Mr.
ее,
Ivliev,
я
I'm
очень
glad
рада,
to see
что
you, and
наше
other
сотрудничество
colleagues,
будет
Ms.
продолжено.
Salavatova,
Все-таки, Григорий
who I do
Петрович,
not see,
спасибо
but
вам.
Mr. Ivliev, thank you so
Благодаря
much.
вашей конференции
This is thanks to your
гендерная
conference,
политика в
the
области
gender
интеллектуальной
policy and the
собственности
area of intellectual
будет
property
все-таки
will
сохранена
still
не
be
только в Российской
retained not only
Федерации,
in
но и
the
в
Russian
российском
Federation,
пространстве
but
тоже.
in Eurasia
Вы
as
знаете, мы
well.
уже как бы ждем вот вашу
We are looking
конференцию,
forward to your
конференцию
conference of
осеннюю. Мы
Rospatent, the
понимаем,
one
что
which
придет
has to
октябрь,
be
и эта
arranged
конференция
in autumn,
состоится, и
and
мы сможем каждый
we
из нас рассказать о каких-то своих
expected that
достижениях, о
once
опыте и каких-то
October
проблемах.
comes,
Поделиться,
each of
поскольку
us would
все-таки
be
наше с
able to
вами
share our problems, our
сообщество, оно
concerns,
очень
our
тесное.
challenges.
И
Our
вы
community
знаете,
is
мы
very
друг друга не
niche
просто
one.
знаем, а друг другу
Not only
помогаем.
we know each other, but
И
also
я
we
хотела
help
бы
each other.
сразу
And
обратить
from the very
внимание
outset, I would like to
аудитории
draw the attention
на
of the
тот факт,
audience
что мы с
to the very
Роспатентом,
fact that, along with
я считаю, что
Rospatent,
именно последний год работали практически ежедневно,
we worked
если не
on a
сказать, что
daily
ежечасно.
basis or even
Вы
hourly
будете первая
basis.
аудитория, которая
You'll be the very
услышит о
first
том,
people
что
to
2
hear
недели назад
about the fact that
в
2
рамках
weeks
10
ago,
рабочая группа
in
по
the framework
техническому
of the
сотрудничеству
technical cooperation of
интеллектуальной собственности
PCT
рекомендовала
of
нашу организацию
WIPO,
Европейское ведомство
a decision has been taken that
назначению международным поисковым органом.
our
И
agency is to
органам
be
предварительной
appointed
экспертизы.
the
И вы знаете, я
International
хотела
Search
бы
Vehicle
обратить
and
внимание ваше на
International
тот факт,
Expertise
что
Agency,
ассистент офис – это
and
офис,
Assistant
которым
Office,
выбирается
the one which
Борисом
is
для помощи и
selected by
поддержки организации,
WIPO in order
для
to
сбора документов, для
assist
проверки
collection
этой
of
организации. И
documents
одним из
to
этих
check and
офисов
verify
был Роспатент. И вы знаете, всегда
an organization or a
какие-то
company.
политические вопросы, когда мы
Rospatent
начинали,
has always been
нам говорили,
one
ну,
of
наверное,
such
Роспатент будет
agencies,
против,
and
потому что они на сегодняшний
sometimes
день
we were
являются
told that
поисковым органом
Rospatent would
Следственного
be
комитета.
against
Но то, как
this
себя
our
Роспатент
nomination,
повел,
but
сколько он нам помог,
Rospatent
это
helped us
действительно
very
какой-то,
much.
знаете, уровень совсем
And this is a
другого
totally different
отношения,
level of relations and cooperation.
профессионального отношения.
So you proved to be top-notch
Так как,
professionals.
в рамках пандемии,
As far as
когда
amid
я
the
заявку,
pandemic,
было настолько всё
it was
сложно и
amid the
непросто.
pandemic that we made
Все
our
те
application. It
международные
was far from
механизмы
being
принятия
easy. All the
решений, они
international
были
mechanisms
отложены, и
for
не
decision-making were
только во
postponed,
всем мире, но и воистине знали,
not
как
only all
принимать
over the
решения
world, but
такого
WIPO
масштаба, которые
also didn't know
действительно
how
они
to
глобальные
take a
решения,
decision of a global nature.
придание статуса международной
For
организации.
instance, nomination,
И наша организация,
certain agency
временно
as
потребная
an
организация,
international
настаивала и объясняла,
organization,
что
and
нам
our
это
agency
нужно
insisted
достаточно
that we
срочно,
need that
поскольку
very urgently.
в этом году
Because
исполнилось
this year
25
we
лет
celebrated
организации,
25th
и у нас был
anniversary
юбилей.
since the organization was set up.
Эта норма
We had a celebration, and this norm of applying for the status of international search vehicle has been enshrined in the convention, Article 25, and we were waiting for this status for several decades. And we were helped very much by Rospatent, and Azerbaijan helped us and supported us at the Technical Commission session, and Kazakhstan extended its support. The Russian office in Geneva helped us. They acted as coordinators. I'd like to thank everyone for doing these things for us, and early next year we hope that we'll obtain that status. Back to the digital agenda. At the moment, last year when we reported on our remarkable figures in terms of digital application, 75%, we believe that it was actually the ceiling, the upper limit, we were extended by the patent attorneys that 75% this is the ultimate limit, because not everyone can apply digitally. But this year, amid the pandemic, actually, we boasted a figure of 89% of digital applications. So it means that during the pandemic, this figure grew by 15%. We are grateful to the applicants for shifting to the digital. Back to the e-workflow, the figures are quite considerable, close to 8%. I would also like to tell you that last year we introduced a continuous publication, which reduced the time frame almost 2 times. 47% of time was saved before, and the time frame used to be 102 days. Now this is 2 times less. So this is another our achievement, which means that the Eurasian Patent Organization is one of the most advanced in terms of the implementation of the digital agenda. I'd like to extend my gratitude to other countries, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, which ratified the Industrial Samples Protocol. Last year, the very first ratification certificate was handed over to the Secretary General of WIPO by to the ambassador of Kyrgyzstan. It was the very first such certificate. We were very happy about that, because you know that we needed badly that 3 such certificates are handed over, and several months afterwards the protocol would be enforced. Azerbaijan and Armenia, I understand that, will very soon hand over their ratification certificates. And Grigory, thank you so much for your promotion of the protocol. Thank you so much for the support of the urban roadmap. It was really our joint work, and October 28th, I hope that the Russian Federation would take a positive resolution regarding our protocol. At the session of the State Duma, I know that Kazakhstan held a meeting of the working group in the parliament, and the protocol is already handed over to the Senate. This is the last stage, and I hope that by the beginning of the next year we'll have 5 certificates and we'll start our full-fledged work, and we'll be looking forward to your staff here in Moscow. Understanding that the IP field is about the youth, this is about our future this year, we decided that even during the lockdown, we decided to hold the 2nd patent All-Russian Universiade. The applications are to be submitted prior to February 28th, and we asked all the patent agencies to submit their applications to find young people who are ready to participate in this contest, because last year it was a big success with lots of participants. And you know that the winners were invited to the Astana event, and 3 bids or applications were executed by the patent attorneys as the patent applications, and the children were happy, and the children were happy because they were not just inventors, but they can position themselves as Eurasian applicants. And the last but not least, last week, me and Mr. Ivliev visited Virus and Immunology Institute named after Grigory. When Rospatent registered the very first vaccine, and the feedback was very controversial to that all over the world, but we were so joyful, but mixed with a little bit of anxiety. But when I visited last week Grigory Institute, and we were introduced to the young laboratory workers, young doctors, and its director, Mr. Ginsburg, who told us about how they work. They employ 1,200 virus specialists, 1,200 doctors, and they have 5 million of strains and viruses, and this is one of the leading organizations according to the Budapest Pact, and they were the ones who invented the vaccine, and I'm very glad that they did that, and they undergo now the third stage of the clinical tests. Well, people, and we understand that COVID, actually no one is immune from COVID-19. You may do politics and say some smart things or not smart things, but COVID is something which may affect all of us, every family member. I'd like to thank Emily Institute, Rospatent, Mr. Ginsburg, Mr. Ivliev, the Russian government for paying so much attention to the development of vaccine against COVID-19. We're all human, and we would like to live long and happily. So, at that optimistic note, let me conclude that we have not one vaccine, but as I read yesterday, there are 40 such vaccines which undergo the third stage of clinical tests, and there are more than 200 such vaccines to be anticipated, but the Russian vaccine was the very first. Yuri Gagarin was the first man in the space, and the very first vaccine was developed by Russia as well. And last but not least, Ms. Lovatova, I hope that you hear me. We have to arrange for that Eurasian Women's Forum, and I hope that we'll be joined by other female speakers, Ms. Moldashova, and will not let you down, dear men. Everything would be great. And the Eurasian Patent Organization will help you in arranging the Eurasian Female Forum. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Ms. Ivliev, instantly, your initiative boosted the work of a number of roundtables, and one of the sections would be dedicated to the industrial samples. And I do think that we will continue working on that, so we'll elaborate that. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank our colleagues from the Federation Council for their participation. Let me pass the floor to Mr. Lulin, Deputy Minister of Science and Education. And we are discussing not only the issues pertinent to our ministry, but we are discussing the development of IP in Russia as well, and a lot would depend on the policy conducted by the Ministry of Science and Education, how the intellectual property is involved in the workflow. Dear Mr. Ivliev, dear participants and dear guests of the 24th conference dedicated to IP, on behalf of the Ministry of Science and Education, I'd like to welcome you at this remarkable and hallmark event. I would like to note a multi-year, long-standing cooperation between Rospatent and the Ministry of Science and Higher Education, which gets a new impetus nowadays because we are upgrading the IP system, we are improving regulations in order to provide for the protection of IP and to obtain necessary results from that work. This is necessary to set up a totally different technology transfer system of a high quality. The roadmap, which was approved by an act of the government of the Russian Federation, the rules on consideration and settlement of disputes around the IP were enforced. This is very important for the inventors who are dealing with intellectual activity and who are ready to get their work patented. I'm sure that the licensing agreements will be discussed, and there will be another system to be set up in order to facilitate the work of the inventors of the enterprises. Our engineers and inventors have to be sure that their work would be merited at a very high level. Rospatent helped the Russian government to develop the order of compensation for the industrially important samples and inventions. Next year, we anticipate a big work on accreditation of universities and R&D institutes in the field of the preliminary consideration of their patent applications. Certain items would be included into the civic code of the Russian Federation. We are working in the framework of the Russian universities and academia in order to extend the scope for patent law experts to be trained. This is aimed at improving the efficiency of commercializing the results and outcomes of the intellectual activity. I express my hope that the roundtable dedicated to the training of specialists will facilitate a further cooperation between the Ministry of Science and Education and Rospatent in what you do to train patent specialists. Besides, one of the priorities of the national project, Science and Universities, is setting up 35 centers, at least, to transfer technologies to provide for commercial results of the intellectual activity in the area of higher education in order to perform the act of the government enforced since 2018. And to conclude my brief remarks, I'd like to highlight the most important areas of work. Saying that, I would like to wish fruitful work to all the participants in that conference. Stay healthy and implement your plans. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I'd like to thank the ministry, because you can say that last year the ministry revived such area of science as patent science. We financed research in such a narrow specialization area. We continue this financing, and we will continue the funding in the future. And this has raised this work to a wholly new level. Previously, we did this based on the orders from corporations. I would like to thank Gazprom Bank, for instance, for their support. And now, together with the government funding, this has gained an excellent pace. For instance, in terms of personnel training, we have done a special research. We published a book, and a very intensive work is underway now in this respect. I would like to thank our colleagues for creating the Center for International Intellectual Property. And I have special request. The main guidelines of the government operation provides for 5,000 training places for retraining of IP specialists. But this has been, unfortunately, deferred. The universities have failed to do this, but the government still intends to retrain 5,000 experts. We've been undertaking steps to fund this via the digital economy program. I will request you to support us at the political level, because alongside retraining and access to new information bases, because we will have 11 new government systems that will provide for search for throughout the entire patent fund, throughout the entire global patent fund, the global information. It is a paramount task, and we need to train people to use this method. We would like to thank you for your professional approach. Vladimir Medvedev, Viktor Kalinin. It is a principal task to all of us to reach common understanding with the Federation Council and with the State Duma. We look at it from the same viewpoint, and this helps us to work for the common goal. This book has a foreword by Andrei Belousov. It has set one of the tasks, and set the tasks, and one of the tasks is to train personnel. We told during our report that we work in accordance with that instruction. We do work very effectively, but we still need a lot to do. But these questions are fundamental. Now let us get back to gender equality. Our conference meets all the requirements of gender equality. Now I'd like to give the floor to Yelena Borisenko, Deputy Chair of Gazprom Bank. Intellectual property is an important tool to increase competitiveness. The group of companies in Gazprom Bank works to this goal. Thank you very much, dear Mr. Ivliev. Dear colleagues, I would like to tell you that it's a fifth or sixth conference already that I am attending. And I would like to extend my special thanks to our international guests, to Mr. Imkanov, to Ms. Tevlesova, and to others for your courageous work, because you've been continuing this work despite all the hardships. This conference, which we are participating in, is not yet another posh conference. This is what makes a difference from other conferences. We have seen many times how discussions that go here were then implemented into roadmaps and concrete steps. Today, for instance, Ms. Tevlesova mentioned fundamental transformations that have taken place in the Eurasian area, and this is excellent. Gazprom Bank finds intellectual property one of the top priorities that we need to support. Why is so? Because we believe genuinely that successful investment projects, that successful business operations are impossible without technological and innovative development. And these are impossible without IP protection, because investors wouldn't like to invest any funds without a hope to get proper protection. And in my capacity as a lawyer, as the graduate of the St. Petersburg Legal School, where IP has always been quite strong, quite a strong aspect in our work, I can tell you that during my university years, just as today, we saw attempts to challenge the necessity to protect IP. Because dissidents think that IP prevents development. This is why, in order to protect ourselves from such attempts, we find it critical to offer IP room for development. What do we see in Russia? Why are we proud for Rospatent? Because the quantum leap that Rospatent has made over the past 5 years is hard to overestimate. I can remember very well how, in the beginning of my career, it was a nightmare when you wanted to submit an application to Rospatent. Only very few people could enter this holy place. But now Rospatent is open to any user. We ourselves are an active user of Rospatent, and we're happy to see this transformation that has taken place. Mr. Ivliev has already mentioned that Deloitte, in its research, assessed Rospatent together with our breakthrough agencies such as the Anti-Monopoly Service and Russian Taxation Service as one of the best. But these were always at the cutting edge of development, and the fact that Rospatent is together with them is a great success. And colleagues, please accept my heartfelt congratulations on this achievement. Another important achievement which we have made, and I would like to underscore that without the ministry and without the scientific community, this wouldn't have been possible. We have this excellent program that we have been developing together with the Rospatent, the program for IP property and IP development center at the Tomsk State University. The Tomsk State University is one of the leading agencies in this respect in Russia. Tomsk has an excellent cluster of innovation development already. This is why we decided together with Mr. Ivliev that this should be developed in Tomsk. We will hold international conferences there on legal aspects of IP development and protection this coming November. We have master's programs there. We have excellent feedback, and people have been thanking us for this work. And we, in our turn, would like to thank Rospatent and Skolkovo University for doing this together with us. We have heard today already about the roadmap for the development of the business climate and its transformation. We're glad that it provides for protection of electronic documents. It is quite important for us, and we're happy that this is now an item on the roadmap. It also provides for new authorities to agencies reporting to Rospatent. You can now involve scientific and research organizations into patent assessment. Why is this important? Because Rospatent employees are unique people, not only in Russia, but in all the countries involved in this development process. Experts working at Rospatent quite often are excellent, unique officers that any business can be jealous for. So it is extremely important that their conditions of work, all the technologies that are available to them, should be at the top level. Every time I come to our meetings, I point out a topic which we find particularly important, because you shouldn't just say, thank you, good job, and that's it. This is why I would like to ask Rospatent, but also all the partners, international partners, all the patent authorities, to think about and maybe to implement our long-term dream of creating a more protected regime for intellectual property program. I'd like to remind you that software programs are protected the way books are at the moment. As a result, this leads to a whole range of various risks. In Russia, at least, we see every week a dispute with an employee that goes to another company and its former employer that are looking for ways to reconcile. We think that companies that have created a certain software, where an employee has created the software as part of its duty, companies like that should have a tool to protect themselves without losing the right to use this software. Because at the moment, the document turnover, which falls under the law, is extremely complicated, is extremely difficult to enforce. This is why very few organizations are capable of keeping their rights. So I would like to ask the conference participants to think what we can do to improve these norms, to develop them harmonically in the Eurasian environment. This would only be very good for the business. To wrap up my very short welcome speech, I would like to wish all of you success. Wish success to all the heads of patent authorities that are represented here, but also to those who are not present here, because what you are doing is not sealed until the very first multi-billion dispute. And then it turns out that you hold all the tools. So I wish you to be rewarded, to be assessed properly. I wish you all good health, and may your employees working in your agency be very well off. and we will provide our best help because, like I said, we find the intellectual property sphere is one of the infrastructure priorities for the development of the business climate. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Borisenko. Now I understand why the presidential administration has set us a task to protect software. We will work on it. Clearly, we will need to work on this from an area where software is just placed within agency. We should raise the whole protection of software rights. Thank you, Ms. Borisenko. Thank you, Mr. Lyulin, for your participation. We feel your support, and we are happy. We will be happy to work with you again. We have speakers online and offline taking turns, so we will now have Azerbaijan online. Kamal Imanov, head of the Agency for Intellectual Property of Azerbaijan. So our honorable colleague is now taking the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm glad to see all of you. And all of you. And I'm convinced, and I would like to extend my special regards to Mr. Ivliev. I would like to thank you for inviting me to participate in this outstanding international forum and for the possibility to address all the participants of this conference on behalf of the NGC of Intellectual Property of the Azerbaijani Republic. I see this as yet another proof of the fact that we have close friendship ties between the Russian and the Azerbaijani peoples. Strategic partnership that is quite typical of our intergovernmental relations between the Russian Federation and the Azerbaijani Republic. Dear friends, I think I'm obliged to touch upon a very important aspect of the issue of aggression occupation over the past 30 years of the Armenian armed forces and of the fact that they renewed their hostile activities against Azerbaijan. In view of this, I'd like to underscore in particular the friendly policy of the Russian Federation and Honorable Vladimir Putin, who has stated very clearly that military conflicts is now in the area of Azerbaijan. Despite an agreement on truce a week ago, Armenian armed forces deliberately started shelling Azerbaijani inhabited locations. A missile attack carried out in the night on the city of Ganja during the night is in fact a military crime. A ballistic missile launched from Armenia killed 10 people and wounded 35 more. A week later, another missile attack by Scud on the same city resulted in the death of 13 people and 50 people wounded. It's a crime against civilian. This is barbarian, which has been condemned by the General Secretary of the United Nations, Eurasian Council. Dear colleagues, we decisively committed to extend and strengthen mutually beneficial cooperation between Azerbaijan and the Russian Federation. In the very near future, we expect to sign a memorandum, the memorandum on cooperation. We are unique ministries, we have unique personnel, and we make steps to develop our sciences, which will make our scientific legacy even richer. If we rephrase a phrase by Chateaubriand, it's not the right that generates the duty, but the duty generates the right. We at the agencies of intellectual property should help us, should help our governments to improve our economies. Intellectual property and the function of this institute against the construct of current challenges will help to influence the existing landscape of intellectual property. This is very important from the point of view of future evolution of intellectual property and in the international architecture.
It is crucial that intellectual property is not an impediment, is not something which would hinder this process. It should join the progress, but with the prerequisite that we have to enshrine the intellectual property in the documents and statutes. Now, when the knowledge and excellence becomes one of the drivers for the industrial production, we have to develop a systemic understanding of IP, which becomes a more sophisticated notion, which correlates with the economy and social sphere. Actually, this is not just something which would characterize the industrial IP, but first and foremost, this is the area of actually the outcome which any person who applies for a patent anticipates. It is aimed at improving the competitiveness of the market, and this is also part and parcel of the activity of entrepreneurs. According to our opinion, the IP notion, in its definition, includes not only the inclusion of exclusive rights of a physical person or legal entity, but the very results of the intellectual activity, which actually have certain rights. So this is not just the playing with the words, but this is the reassessment of the notion. These are not the rights which become an object of the regulation, but these are the objects and the outcomes of the intellectual activity, which have these rights. And here we see this energy and the reassessment of the Institute of Intellectual Property. And therefore, along with the law, we have to study the economy and the social consequences of intellectual property. Commercialization of the IP, along with the social component of the IP institute. We have to understand the economic components, and the economic component becomes the spinal cord of the whole notion. Therefore, the intellectual property agencies have to improve the efficiency of their activity. And they have to actually speak from the positions of modern institutionalization norms and regulations. It means that we have to be pinpointed by economy and social studies, because our organizations, which are actually taking care of intellectual property, are in charge of protecting the rights, were designed specifically for that. We have to bring together the IP and copyright. Without commercialization of novelties, there will be no innovations, and innovations boost the economy. And once you exclude the copyright and the adjacent rights, you leave behind the social aspect and the economic component of the creative industry. This is thanks to the institutional reform which was done by the administration of the country. Our patent agency is in charge of all the fruits of the intellectual activity. As an expert, I see the synergy of different types of intellectual property and mutual enrichment of the lawmakers and managers. According to the latest competitiveness index by Davos World Forum, the protection of intellectual property in the framework of the Institute aggregates, Azerbaijan is the leader among CIS countries and is also outperforming a number of the European countries. And it was just the introductory part, and I wish everyone every success. And as far as Mr. Ivliev asked me to share some of my considerations regarding the trends in the area of IP, which I have, then, if I may, I would like to continue my speech. Ladies and gentlemen, the transformation of IP nowadays and in the future equals interdisciplinary approach, and it is tightly connected with the technology. At the same time, we see the erosion of the traditional notions of IP. For instance, the internet platforms are integrating the IP sphere, and for instance, we see the transformation of the digitalized object of intellectual property, which generates a controversy between the cross-border nature of the web and the digital nature of the patent content. And we may see that actually this is a subject matter of the international law. The digital environment, as Dr. Gage has said, the law is very rigid and something which is limiting the development. Internet culture says that the behavior of people on the internet influences the whole processes even more than the law. And therefore, we have to develop some legal schemes of IP regulation and management, actually meeting the expectations of the internet users. So we have to simplify it to the extent that licensing would be as simple as doing something else. We are seeking new ways to protect such results of IP as microorganisms and strains, microprocessors, which patent protection is not very efficient. In general, the IP development can be characterized by three main areas in direction. First of all, and this is most important, we see the emergence of new objects of IP, new ways of using them, and new spheres of the application. For instance, when IT is being used in our real life, including the artificial intelligence, big data have been generated about the biological knowledge, which go beyond the traditional measurements or artificial intelligence based technologies, totally unmanned, are being created. And so we do not know what the patent would imply, actually, the composer, the author, or the inventor. In order to protect big data, usually we use the commercial secret notion. And therefore, a question arises as to the possession of the repository or the rights holder or the big data, and we agree with the experts who say that we have to redefine the property rights regarding certain grades and classes of property which go beyond the classical categories. And this is totally crucial. In case of AI, the protection have to be extended to the results of the creative activity, which implies the work of a man and the artificial intelligence. And this is regardless of the structure of the work done. As for the legal protection of the object which was created without an impact of a man, whether they can be recognized as the intellectual property object, including actually the out-of-court resolution of disputes. So this is a subject matter for discussions and debates. And the professional committee has to address this problem. The result of the intellectual activity may be achieved by means of interaction or a kind of cooperation between natural forces and the inventor, for instance, the gene immunity vehicles. And this is how the inventor discovers the natural potential. So it means that the invention actually is very close to the discovery, and the discovery is not protected internationally. And the inventions cannot be done either actually in a public domain or in a private domain. In that case, the inventor would retain his commercial secret, and it will not move forward the other applications made on the basis of that discovery. Also, we have to extend the subject scope of the inventors. This is thanks to the web. We see the access to the results of the intellectual activity. And anyone can actually apply the discoveries and inventions in practice. But the intellectual property law actually was created many years ago when many things were non-existent yet. And the scope of the intellectual property protection is very limited. So in essence, the current intellectual property law is not ready for taking into consideration these differences. We have to distinguish the legal regimen, the amateur one and the professional one. And if we do that, we'll complicate the distinguishing between different mechanisms. And number three, it becomes very evident that we see shortages and disadvantages in the current regulations of the intellectual property regimen. And it's not only in what concerns the objects of the intellectual property, but it depends on the technologies. Different objects of intellectual property have to be regulated differently. One size fits all is no longer applicable. For instance, ICT area, as far as it is affected by patent trolls and other misuses are being observed there, the time taken to obtain an ICT patent extends very much, and the validity of a patent lasts for no more than 3 years. And on the contrary, many companies want to grandfather their patents or extend the validity of their patents. We'd like to focus on several trends. If we look at the history of property rights, which define the development of the European civilization in general, it becomes obvious that such a development went along the lines of the restriction of the privacy. So it means that the inventions of the property were socialized. Then we may say that it also brought about the subjective law, but the accent shifts. No longer we're speaking about the protection of the property to the protection of investments. And the results of the intellectual activity become secondary. Therefore, with the time, the key elements of regulation would be not the exceptional rights, but definition of the limits and boundaries of these rights. And the final thing is the role of the intellectual property in the development of the economy. So the impact of the intellectual property on the economy is very sophisticated and includes the infrastructure, the maturity of the venture capital, the size of the market, etc., etc. So the exceptional rights actually are used in order to boost the innovations, but also to protect the rights holders. According to the economists and researchers, intellectual property may matter differently in different economic spheres and industries. The research shows that if the connection between the intellectual property protection rights for emerging markets and the mature markets are almost equal. Still, how to protect these rights? The answer is ambiguous. The study by our office showed that over the last year, the connection between the global activity and actually what we are doing in Azerbaijan is not very much different, but the correlation between the protection of intellectual property and the global competitiveness index, then we see a very strong connection, 0.7%. Along with that, dear colleagues, there is a number of other problems which are current and which are connected to the worsening, to improvement of our legislation, but I will not deep dive into that. Finally, I would like to wish fruitful discussion to the participants of the conference, and I wish you to stay healthy. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for a very profound contribution. The processes which take place in the IP area. Thank you so much for a very concise analysis of the processes and trends. As an outstanding philosopher in the area of intellectual property, you continue your creative work. I'd like to suggest that following the results of your presentation, first of all, that please send to us the text of your presentation. Your speech was brilliant, but it would be good to have the text in front of the eyes, because online licensing, for instance, and online registration of new objects and means of using IP, the obsolete investment protection mechanisms. This is a very exact analysis which we have to promote and further. I suggest that in a month or in 6 weeks' time, actually, we may have a video conference between us and Azerbaijan to discuss the questions which we have highlighted, discussing that within a narrow group of experts, so that we could discuss that in more detail. Thank you so much, Mr. Imanov. We're looking forward to the text of your presentation. Ms. Moldosheva from Rospatent, she will continue our video conference and she will speak at our conference as well. Ms. Moldosheva, over to you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Mr. Ivliev and dear colleagues, dear guests. On behalf of Rospatent, I'm glad to welcome all the participants in the 24th International Conference, Transformation of Intellectual Property Environment in the Modern Conditions. I'm glad to welcome my colleagues, Mr. Ivliev, dear guests, all those who we know, those who I see for the first time. I do hope that following the results of the conference, we'll have very friendly relations. We'll continue our cooperation for the sake of the development of IP in our republics, for the sake of the development of innovations. Dear colleagues, the world is changing very rapidly under the impact of the information technologies and innovative business models. The ongoing changes are backed by creative, technical, and innovative work. In that rapidly changing reality, IP also has to develop an industrial-wide strategy, national and international one. The IP industry has to take its niche in the digital space. Therefore, the topic of the conference is very timely and very relevant. We may discuss our modern objectives and the prospects to define the common tendencies and the ways to develop further in the area of intellectual property. The challenge which was posed by COVID-19 necessitated the update of the digital agenda of our countries. I do believe that the efforts undertaken by the IP agencies have to be consolidated and driven to address non-traditional, non-conventional approaches, and I'm sure that this conference will become a prerequisite for all the stakeholders in that area. The range of questions which were highlighted for that conference embraces a broad range of IP questions. What IP institutions are today, and also what has to be done in order to speed fast the development of IP Institute. I do think that we will obtain the answers to these questions during that conference. The participants in the conference, Mr. Ivliev, I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity to congratulate the Federal Intellectual Property Authority on your 65th anniversary. I wish every success to the team of Rospatent attaining goals. I'd like to note your free-of-charge work and of Rospatent and its subsidiaries. I wish flourishing to the IP both in Russia and abroad. Rospatent is one of the leading agencies in charge of intellectual property all over the world. and is one of the key subjects of the international law in the area of intellectual property. 2020 has become a hallmark for Russian-Kyrgyz year. This is a year of Russia in Kyrgyzstan and Kyrgyz year in Russia this year. We held a number of events in order to strengthen our bilateral relations between Rospatent and Kyrgyzpatent. We are very grateful to our colleagues from Rospatent for their continuous assistance in the development of the IP system in Kyrgyzstan. I'm confident that our cooperation will deepen and extend further. Just like in Kyrgyzstan, Russia is transforming the public services offered digital way, artificial intelligence, big data, IoT, are being introduced into the everyday life of people, including to the life of the patent agencies. And I'm happy that our colleagues from Rospatent are doing a lot in that area. Rospatent's efforts in digitalization of their activity and development of the digital products is something which we actually credit them with. Such digital projects and products may compete against the digital projects of WIPO. Dear colleagues, we planned to attend this conference offline because the conference will discuss the topics which are of relevance for us. Unfortunately, the pandemic-19 introduced its amendments to us, and therefore we cannot be present there the conventional way. And we are applying to the technologies. We speak about the transformation of the IP field. I would like to note the fact that apart from the digital agenda, using artificial intelligence, we see a tendency that many departments and agencies in charge of the intellectual property are involved into the development of the innovative activity in their countries. In that context, the role of IP agencies is pivotal. We are confident that once this field is governed properly, the IP agencies may favor further development of innovative ecosystem. And finally, to conclude my remarks, dear colleagues and Mr. Ivliev, I'd like to wish you fruitful work, interesting discussions, and win-win cooperation. I'm confident that the 24th International Conference by Rospatent will attain its goal, and each of us would obtain necessary answers to the questions. Thank you so much for your attention.
Уважаемый Динар Автогилов, нам очень понравилось ваше выступление. Очень. Спасибо большое. Если можно, пришлите нам это в письменном виде.
Thank you very much. Could you please send your speech to us in writing so that we could publish it on our information resources? Colleagues, let us continue this discussion. Let's continue our video conference. Pavel Spitsyn, director of the rep office of the WIPO in Russia, has the floor. No sound. Unfortunately, no sound. No sound. Pavel, we cannot hear you. Please see if your mic is on. Pavel, our sound is on. Please check your sound. We cannot hear you, Pavel. Colleagues, could you please check the connection? Pavel, let's wait a bit. Let's check connection and we'll reconnect to you. Colleagues, could you please check the connection? And then please let me know. We'll get back to the video conference. And now, let us continue our offline meeting. I'd like to give this floor to the head of the Council of Voyer, our colleague, who's the head of the community of inventors, Anton Ishchenko. Dear Grigory Petrovich, dear conference participants, organizers of this outstanding international forum covering IP sphere, on behalf of the All Russia Society of Inventors and Innovators, I'd like to welcome you to this 24th International Conference. You know, I think that today we're already summing up the results of some of the decisions that were made in the previous conferences. Today we have heard a lot of good words about Rospatent. On behalf of the professional community that unites all the inventors of Russia, I can tell you definitely that the changes, the positive changes that we have seen in the work of Rospatent and in the era of IP are clearly seen and are very important. We're attending a site where we held discussions. This is why I'd like to raise a question that would start a discussion. I think that the word transformation, which we're using, is not quite well selected for this conference. It cannot quite describe what we have done over the past years. I think that it would be better to use rationalization, because transformation is a process which is not always met with positive results. Sometimes it brings about negative results, so it can develop both ways. But rationalization means taking smart decisions, increasing efficiency. This is what we should focus on, which we should strive to reach in any organization, in any business, in any economy, in any country. And in this respect, it is critical to see how the management will structure this process at all the levels, both at the national level and at the level of corporations. This is why I think that Rospatent is quite successful in this respect. While the Russian Federation clearly sees a very low perception of innovations, we see how difficult it is to implement innovations in Russia. We're years behind countries leading in this respect, but Rospatent is okay in this respect. We can see that this agency has been changing significantly. We see new high-tech solutions which they have introduced. And the pace at which Mr. Ivliev is setting is impressive and makes me express my deepest thanks. We can see a very active stance on behalf of Mr. Ivliev with respect to the assistance for any initiatives by inventors. For instance, in year 2020, Rospatent, despite all the pandemic restrictions, has helped us to launch new invention salons in Sebastopol. Mr. Ivliev attended these openings in person. Rospatent today is one of the most efficient digital agencies. We have already discussed this today. Rospatent is one of the agencies that is the quickest to register applications globally. Today, probably not in this conference, but overall, in Russia, we have been discussing the government information systems that will be implemented in the near future. And clearly, the inventor community is waiting for the thing which is most important to us, for the nation resource on turnover of rights for IP, because we understand that in terms of commercialization, there's a great unrealized potential. We also would like to point out that despite a very active transformation and rationalization of the patent authority, there is still quite a big number of problems related to inventors' projects, in particular funding of such projects at early stages. Unfortunately, the Deputy Minister has already left the building, but I think we have to raise questions before the Ministry of Science and the entire government, because there are some negative comments I'd like to point out. For instance, there are no limits anymore on compensation of interest rates issued to involve into invention activities. Unfortunately, it is a very negative step that will affect IP sphere in Russia in a very serious way. Despite the fact that we haven't been able to find support from the Ministry of Science, Rospatent has been usually supporting all our initiatives. And Rospatent has provided full-scale support for the initiatives offered by the All Russia Society of Inventors on the minimum level of payments for the results of intellectual activities and for inventions. I think this is yet another very important component of the federal agencies' activities. Their understanding, their initiatives to harmonize interests of the government and of the inventor community is very important, and it gives us, it makes us believe even more that we are on the right path. We, as citizens of the Russian Federation, find the IP sphere to hold enormous unrealized potential. Just a few numbers. Switzerland is a small country, but still it sells export licenses for its IP for 22 billion US dollars. US, more than 120 billion US dollars. In Russia, it's less than 1 billion US dollars. At the same time, we realize that the market is huge. If you recalculate per capita, we're hundreds and hundreds times lower. The entire military and industrial complex sold only $14 billion worth of products in year 2019. So this is a potential that we need to tap into, and we want to be competitive with such innovative countries as I have mentioned. I'm confident that the strategy of the development of the Russian Federation, the IP sphere, will help us. This strategy has been discussed in this hall for many times. I hope that we'll make practical steps sooner or later, and we'll see a document that will help us to accelerate all our initiatives in this respect in order to build a full-scale working market system in the area of IP property. I'm convinced that in this conference we will be able to discuss these outstanding issues, and the results of these discussions will be transformed into decisions that will help us to rationalize, to improve, that will help us to help both the inventors of Russia and the economy of Russia and the economy of countries accessing the international conference held by Rospatent to work even better. I would like to congratulate all of you one more time on the opening of this conference and extend my deepest thanks to Mr. Ivliev and to extend my best wishes on your new jubilee. I'm convinced that this 65 years of the work of this agency, despite this age, it makes you only younger. Let us see what we can do to support your IP operations. We have just refined the mechanism for supporting, and now we're losing this mechanism to support your activities. Let us react to this. Let us find ways to help you via the business community and via our agency. Dear colleagues, we held expert assessment in very difficult cases, and in 50% of cases we turn to the Academy of Sciences of Russia, and whenever we have difficult cases, I receive statements from the Academy of Sciences of Russia signed by Secretary of particular department of the Academy of Sciences, and in this case I have no doubts left about what we need to do. Today we have advisor to the President of Academy of Russian Sciences, Mr. Valery Chichkanov. Dear colleagues, dear Grigory, dear Mr. Ivliev, I have a very honorable mission. and would like to extend best wishes from the President of Russian Academy of Sciences. This is an extremely important event that has helped to generate excellent ideas and recommendations, and the leadership of Russia should deal with them directly. Not only this forum deserves this attention from the Russian government, but also the work that you, Mr. Ivliev, and your staff carry out deserve this attention. Dear colleagues, let me begin with a small overture. Some of you, back in the 1990s, may have seen a film by Grigory, which said, this isn't the way we can continue to live. I saw this film. I didn't see anything new. We knew the way that we shouldn't live. Life back in the 1990s was hard, and so starting from the 1990s, we started to look for an answer how we should live and what we need to do. Clearly, this is a very difficult question, but you need to answer it, and particularly those who are the owners of intellectual property should answer this question. Quite often, leaders of the country say something like, raise ideas that we need to make the life in our country better and we need to preserve our population. And you, Mr. Ivliev, in your opening speech, discussed this idea for quite some time. This is indeed so. In particular, you mentioned the statistics, which show that in year 2020 alone, we will see significant negative growth in the Russian population, and this trend, unfortunately, will continue. There are lots of factors contributing to it, both subjective and objective. This brings to mind a very good statement by President Roosevelt. He said that a great country is not a country which has big resources, but a country that can effectively use these resources. We all know that our country has enormous resources. Most often we refer to national resources and the territories, but we should also bear in mind another resource which we're discussing today is the human capital, is the bearers of intellectual competencies. Today, it is hard to overestimate in the present world, as the name of the conference mentions. Indeed, to be able to use these resources, we need good working mechanisms, we need good tools. In our view, everything that Mr. Ivliev and his people have been doing to create a market of high technologies in Russia, you, in my opinion, are one of the important factors in this respect. Dear colleagues, no matter what we say, without high technologies, it would be impossible to hope for any acceleration of GDP growth. It will all remain hollow words. This is why your contribution in this respect and your work aimed at achieving this goal is hard to overestimate. And we're glad that we can help you in this respect as much as we can. We have made close friends with Oleg Imeritin. We work together. We are in close contact. Now, secondly, Mr. Ivliev, you have pointed out something which is also quite important. For instance, factors that contribute to the development of technoparks and technology clusters. It is another important area of development in this country. This will help the intellectual property potential, this vector which is there, to be used much more efficiently. In this respect, I would like to mention your contribution to the development of educational centers. A short time ago, we came back from Chechnya. Mr. Falko was there, so was Mr. Sergeyev. I also attended. And we discussed these issues related to the educational centers in Russia. During our conversations there, we talked to rectors of many universities from all over the country. And all of them referred to things that you mentioned today, everything related to personnel potential, IP potential, and everything which relates to filling this educational potential with intellectual potential. Support for business activities which you offer. It sounds very simple. The formula is very simple. Science plus education. And as you know, this all equals intellectual potential. And the product of this potential is innovations. So what we do is, Mr. Ivliev, we do general things at the interface of science and education. This results in innovations, and then businessmen take these innovations and use them to create resources, such as financial resources, etc. It sounds simple, but along this way, you will have to face lots of challenges, lots of barriers. Unfortunately, Ms. Tevlesova has left. You know that in present-day conditions, in the budget for next year, what is the share of science? What is the share of the knowledge economy, which implies intellectual property? You know, I find it difficult to mention these numbers. It's not in the share. It's by orders of magnitude less than the countries that we are trying to compete against. So, unless everybody making decisions realizes this at this point in time, while this budget is drafted, we can spend a lot of time discussing this, saying lots of things, but this will not change anything. I enjoyed listening to Ms. Borisenko from Gazprom Bank. She's been doing a lot. But, colleagues, this simple formula, how can we see this percentage grow? The monetary policy which is implemented in Russia now, the geopolitics, where large corporations are not involved in any investments at the national level, they live lives of their own, it will be very difficult. Sberbank alone, to say nothing of Gazprom Bank, has assets of about 30 trillion rubles. Dear colleagues, the Russian Federation budget is 27 trillion. The Russian Federation budget is smaller than that of the Sberbank.
So it means that until we change the monetary policy altogether, it would be very difficult to do any transformations of the intellectual property, directing that to the area where it has to be, which would generate the things which we anticipate, such as the growth of the GDP, social and economic activity, improvement of the living standards, etc., etc. This is not by accident that when I came here, Mr. Ivliev correctly said that it's very important that the decisions which follow from the roundtable discussions and plenary discussions are brought together as a document which later on would be handed over to certain executive authorities which would take decisions. And finally, Mr. Ivliev, wholeheartedly, on behalf of the Russian Academy of Sciences, I'd like to wish your team every success in the implementation of very interesting projects which were highlighted in these materials. I have not read them yet, but this is with great pleasure that I will bring that to my boss. And most importantly, I think that this is one of your missions, to provide for the intellectual sovereignty of the country. I think that to this end you need everything you need, and it would be just great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Really, the investments into that sphere, this is a very important area, something which you have to nurture and boost. Thank you so much, representative of the Academy of Sciences, for raising that question all the time. I've signed that book for everyone, but if you want, you may take it right now. It's quite heavy. I've signed this book for you and to Mr. Sergeyev, so that this reference book is available. Dear colleagues, there are two presentations left, two video clips. I suggest that we listen to Mr. Shen Chen-yun, Commissioner of the Public Agency on Intellectual Property. We have the Russian, Mongolian, and Chinese seminar on designs, and this is a very important event which we're holding every year. It's very important to listen to what Mr. Shen Chen-yun tells us, and then we'll pass the floor to Mr. Ryabovolo from Belarus. Again, it would be a video clip. Mr. Zubov will speak at the roundtable discussion. Mr. Ivliev, your respected Director General, I'm glad to welcome all of you here. This is an honor for me to be present at the 24th International Conference of Rospatent. At this special moment, as the COVID-19 pandemic is still continuing, the Rospatent is overcoming various obstacles and holds the conference online and provides all the parties with a good platform to discuss IP issues. On behalf of China National Intellectual Property Agency, I would like to congratulate on the successful conference. Inaudible. And extend my best wishes to the participants. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought a huge impact on the world. In the face of the pandemic, the interests of all countries are closely related, and the destiny of mankind is unique. The topic of the conference is transformation of intellectual property in the modern context, and this topic is very relevant. In order to better respond to the impact of the pandemic and to use all the opportunities of the intellectual property to fight against COVID-19 and its ramifications, the Chinese National Intellectual Property Agency has taken various measures to improve its efficiency. First of all, we have actively responded to the pandemic and optimized the work with IP agencies in order to counter the virus. The Chinese government has adopted measures to prevent its spreading and achieves great results in that respect. In the field of IP, CNIP has specially established a green channel for pandemic, and we adopted many facilitation to boost the reduction of paperwork, actually, and the penalties have been imposed on the delay in the payment of the registration fee. The rights of the patent holders are protected. Our agency expanded the capacity of its existing telecommunicating systems to provide for the continuous work of its subsidiaries online. Secondly, we have adopted for the new channels of work the Patent Bureau. It attaches great importance to the application of emerging new technologies such as artificial intelligence, big data and cloud computation. Amid the pandemic, the agency continued its work using teleconferences, online application interaction at the internet platforms and other remote work platforms. The patent agency improved the quality of services provided and improved the efficiency of its work. Number three, we have reached a new level of communication on IP. Just like other patent agencies all over the world which suffered from the pandemic, CNIPA has undertaken a number of measures, emergency measures. We're discussing the strategy and we establish working relations with the colleagues using bilateral, multilateral channels. We're committed to promote sustainable development of the globalized IP system to make innovations accessible to all people all over the world. Proceeding from our present conditions and focus, I will make three propositions. First, we have to use the whole potential of the IP in order to boost innovations. Innovations are the key to countering and combating the pandemic and to restore our economy. We protect that whilst protecting the economy. The patent act as an important economic stimulus. Amid the economic downturn, we have to use the potential of the intellectual property in order to restore the economy, to develop innovations and entrepreneurship. This way we can support healthcare and contribute to the development of new technologies in order to improve the quality of services rendered. COVID-19 pandemic changed the working conditions around the globe. We have to speed fast setting up of the intellectual property protection for the businesses in order to facilitate their activity, to improve the overall living standards and resilience amid the crisis. Besides, we have to use new technologies in the area of intellectual property and improve the quality of social servicing of the patent bureaus and agencies, raising the bar of the international agencies. We have to further international cooperation. The challenges of COVID-19 show that in order to restore the economy and to combat COVID-19, we have to pull our efforts together and act concertedly. CNIPA is ready to work with the colleagues all over the world in order to jointly address the existing problems of the global intellectual property system and to provide for its stability. People with common aspirations can be divided by seas or by mountains or by COVID-19 pandemic. CNIPA will continue its cooperation with the colleagues all over the world and will continue to facilitate the setting up of the global IP system. The economic recovery takes place thanks to you. Thank you so much. A very structured contribution. That's great that you can actually highlight bullet points number 1, number 2, number 3. And this immediately motivates people to work along these lines. Mr. Ryabovolov, Director General of the Belarus National Center for IP, Belarus. Esteemed participants in this international conference, I'm glad to welcome you on the occasion of that hallmark event. I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to congratulate Rospatent and its head, Mr. Ivliev, on the occasion of the 65th anniversary of your organization. This is a remarkable event. Although I'd like to note that certainly the history of the Russian Patent Agency is even deeper rooted. Your organization did a lot in order to develop not only the national but also regional and international IP system. I wish you every success. Today's event is a unique platform for experience exchange on many aspects of the IP. The world is changing. Transformations are taking place in all the fields. It is accompanied by different challenges and threats in the social and economic and other spheres of our life. This year only attests to that, due to the emergence of the global pandemic. I assume that this is a very temporary challenge which will be overcome along with you. Despite these challenges, we open up new opportunities. As usually happens, these are the challenges and problems which become an impetus facilitating speed-fast development in this and that area. But this requires efforts and political will. I would like to inform you about the fact that the National Center for Intellectual Property of Belarus continues its work on the improvement of the national system of IP. This year, we will complete the development of the strategy of Belarus. This would be the second strategy in a row on the development of IP for 2021-2030. This document enshrines the main milestones of our development in the midterm and in the long run. I would like to extend my gratitude to WIPO for their support in the development of that document. We are ready to share with our colleagues these our achievements and documents, but at the same time I would like to reiterate our interest in generalizing and implementation of the experience of our colleagues. I think that today's conference will contribute to that. In that respect, I would like to extend my gratitude to the organizers for the opportunity to participate in such a respectful and august meeting. I wish everyone to stay healthy and fruits and good results in improvement of the IP system. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Ryabovolov. Is WIPO online? WIPO, Pavel Spitsin, over to you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Good afternoon, dear friends. Can you hear me? Am I audible? Go on, please. Thank you so much, Mr. Ivliev, for confirming that the mic is on and the camera is on. On behalf of the WIPO, let me welcome the organizers and participants in today's conference, international conference which is held for the 24th time, which is dedicated to the transformation of IP in the modern context. We are ready to participate in that annual forum, which for several days becomes the main platform to discuss the pivotal and most crucial issues and questions of the IP development. We are grateful to the organizers of the conference, our colleagues from Rospatent and their personal Mr. Ivliev, for the big scope of work done, for major efforts which you invested into the organization of that conference, online and offline. I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to congratulate our colleagues from Rospatent on the anniversary. For quite a while, Rospatent and the patent agency are doing a lot in order to protect the intellectual property. We said that our cooperation will strengthen with the time and develop. As for the activity of the organization, let me note that the whole world, and our organization is no exception, faced a number of very serious, very grave and material challenges posed by COVID-19. Fortunately, the pandemic didn't have a major impact on our financial resilience. The revenues in terms of fees which we collect are quite good, and the pandemic has not yet actually affected the PCT network at the moment. Actually, we see the rise in the first months of 2020 to the tune of 7%. We also may note some growth in the number of patent applications which we get from the Asian market. China can boast very good results there as well. And we'll monitor the results of the activity of our organization and will notify you on the success which we managed to achieve. The financial situation of the organization is quite sustainable. The surplus allowed us to avoid any arrears, and we increased the net assets. In the first months of 2020, we see some surge in the surplus, which is very good amid the pandemic. As far as you spoke about EPCT network, that this is our main source of revenue, I'd like to note the very fact that, in essence, we are considering the applications which were processed by the national agencies prior to COVID-19. It's very good to retain the tempo and the rate which we have at the moment. The pandemic certainly introduced major changes to our events. Most of them are held online. Can you move the mic closer to your mouth? Can you hear me now? Closer. Like that. Okay. I will hold that in my hand. Can you hear me now, Mr. Ivliev? Okay, I'd like to note that we proceeded to the hybrid mode of events. One of the days, the General Assembly of the WIPO finished its work, bringing together 250 delegates, one per delegation. And the participants spoke only on the items of the agenda which do not require any debates or discussions. And therefore, actually, the agenda was not so busy this time. The organization has undergone some digital transformations. The digital services which are rendered to the outside users are provided on internet platforms. Actually, we went almost fully digital, and therefore our organization actually works remotely or distantly. As been said, we now have a hybrid mode of our events, but about 1,000 of our workers are back to the offices, and they go to the offices twice a week. We still have to integrate our online and offline modes. At the moment, we see the structural changes which affect the working conditions. WIPO has introduced a number of services. For instance, we have introduced an interactive monitoring system to highlight our financial sustainability. We launched at the website a service on rendering information about the decisions and measures taken by the IP agencies amid the pandemic. Also, we launched a new business service, WIPO Approve, in order to get a digital reprint of a file anytime. WIPO also participated in the publication of the Global Index 2020, according to which the pandemic certainly curbs the innovative processes in the world. You know that since the 1st of October, our organization is headed by a new Secretary General, by Mr. Tank, who actually superseded the previous General Secretary, who took that position for 12 years. We hope that we will reach new heights under the new guidance. As for the activity of our office, the pandemic certainly affected the work of our structural unit. Apart from a number of events which we coordinated, bearing in mind our bilateral agenda, we held 23 webinars on diverse IP topics, including IPCT, the Hague system, the Madrid system, and GI, arbitration and mediation. WIPO Proof, WIPO Research, WIPO Green, and WIPO Pandemic. At the moment, we also plan to hold 5 webinars more, which we are going to hold prior to the end of the year.
We also think that one of the achievements are that our webinars are in great demand, and on average 250 people attend each of such events. I would like to reassure that our Red Office will continue its active steps to increase awareness about IP in the Russian Federation. We'll be happy to work together with interested party in planning our future events. I would like to wish all the participants of the conference successful work. I would like to wish you good health and take care. Thank you, Pavel. Some of the participants have already left to join other sessions. I would like to extend my thanks my colleagues from the paid authorities of all the countries for participating in this plenary session. I would like to thank all the speakers and specialists who have made the speeches. I would like to thank leaders of our subsidiaries who are attending this event and working together with us. I would like to thank the chair of the Public Council, Natalia Zolotyk, who is here together with us. Thank you very much. We'll continue our work, and we'll wrap up the results tomorrow at 17 o'clock during the plenary session, where all the leaders and the moderators of all the sessions and roundtables held during this conference will make their speeches. Let us focus on the plenary session tomorrow. During this plenary session, let us focus on the conclusions and takeaways, what we need to do and how we need to do this. Thank you very much. Goodbye and see you tomorrow.
Все, спасибо, коллеги.